kind of growth which is taking place in our country in the e-governance area. And that's what touches and feels us every day. I'll give you an example of a government public sector website, and this example is to tell you the kind of online transaction which takes place. There is a specific website in the month of June. It had a transactions of 150 crores. 15 lakh credit card successful transactions happened on that website. Absolutely, it's the railways. So the concept here is that there is huge amount of activity happening on the e-governance side, and there is very, very little happening there on the security side. That's when they see me, and they see me as a deterrent. And that's what I want to try to avoid completely. The collaborative way, the open source way, we're talking here about cloud, is something which we cannot stop. Adaptation is going to vary. There are various ways to do that. But we know none of us can stop that, and that's what I'm getting to right now. So when we talk about security or risk management, basically what we all do is look at the risks we face when we deploy new technologies and decide what we can do about it, right? And what we do for securing ourselves is deploying something called controls. And to use a jargon, which we said we shouldn't use, is the use of PPT, which is process, people, and technology. So fundamentally what we do is we put in controls to the risks which we face, and these guess the password of the core devices. And I was telling him, great, you are very good, and later on I asked him, how did you find it? So he said, actually I got very lucky, because I knew the network administrator. He was using certain web services. I tried to guess his password. For forgot password option, he had given 2 questions. One is, what's the wife's name and where did I go for the honeymoon? And on Facebook, I knew him, so I knew he had put a photograph of where he went and what his wife's name was. So the poor guy did this out of no intent. I mean, and this can happen to all of us, and not because I'm saying it. I possibly do this thing all the time. You can find a lot of information about me on the web, and I can find a lot of information on you guys about the web. So it's not about who's good, who's bad. It's about awareness. So hence, if we need to deploy controls in use of social networking or social communication, the primary focus needs to be on people. So yes, we need to have policies, we need to have technologies, but a big portion of that is people, in terms of education of people, in terms of what can happen and how to use this sensibly. And you know, we do session networking all the time. All of us have been spending time the last 3 days here talking to each other, telling each other what we do. And it is a form of social networking. But we're doing it very responsibly. Right? That's exactly something which has to go into the blogging space or the social networking space as well. The second is on the cloud side. Now here the example I want to state is when I was working for a venture capitalist, I was trying to build a cloud computing service in the UK. And we built a great technology, we put a lot of money in that technology. We had a very good security system deployed. We had a very good document which we put online and also giving to customers a statement of what our security posture was and how great we are, and the demarcation between customers, the billing systems, everything is perfect. But let me tell you, there's one thing I used to dread, and I was hoping no customer would ever ask me, is the right to audit. And no SaaS service provider, be it the infrastructure service provider, platform service provider, or application service provider, would allow you to audit the environment which you operate on. And a right to audit is fundamental of any outsourcing here. This is something which we do very easily in our own environment. So if we decide to have some controls, and we want to deploy same controls on a cloud environment, we'll have very limited options there, because the right to audit kind of thing would not exist. We cannot deploy our policies on the cloud environment. One big thing missing in the cloud vendor space is transparency. You cannot go to Google and ask today, yes, I'm hosting my premier applications with you. Can you tell me how you can do this for me, a specific question? You'll be directed back with a generic answer, but you will never be able to get a specific answer on that. Transparency is missing there. The point I'm trying to make is, if you want to secure your public cloud environment, the way to do that is by using our policies and procedures. So the first example was people, the second is policy and procedures. I'm not to say that others are not important, but this possibly is a little more critical here. Moving on to open source. And I don't think we've talked about open source technologies a lot in the last couple of days. But the adaptation is amazingly happening here, and I'm sure all of you are doing that as well. Two examples of adaptation, one good, one bad. There is a state in southern India who has the control over what RFPs they will release out as purchases they will make in the state. And an RFP stipulation by the state government is that first you have to justify why you cannot do it on open source. So the adaptation is phenomenal. What is happening there is phenomenal. And all of us will have to do that as we go along as well. There's a flip side to it as well. In 2008, about 7,000 vulnerabilities on technologies were published. And all of us know this. And they keep growing every year. We have nice charts on that. Can you guess who number one was? The number one technology vendor with the largest number of vulnerabilities? Yeah, easy answer. It's always them because we use them a lot. So they are about 3%. And they're number one of the 7,000. The number 4, interestingly, for the first time, is an open source platform called Joomla. Close to about 2% vulnerabilities come from there. It's a platform used for collaboration. It's a platform used by e-learning companies. It's largely a collaborative platform. So fundamentally, as you start adapting of open source, a lot more is happening there in terms of the weaknesses, in terms of the adaptation. So it's a huge amount of activity going on there right now. So it is something we have to watch out for. And I think the control which is very effective in deployment of open source is technology. And technology from security providers like Checkpoint, who make us do control what we deploy, but also awareness and how we deploy open source. It's very critical for us to understand our secure architectures, and very important for us to understand what are the secure ways of deploying these open source technologies. So finally, one last point which I think goes across all these 3 areas, and unfortunately I have seen it neglected most of the time, is understanding of the legal framework in India as far as IT security is concerned. Okay? And it is a very, very crucial point, and I'll give you two examples to illustrate this point. As you all know, the only governance framework, the only law we have in India as far as IT security is concerned is called the IT Act 2000, which is getting amended as we speak, and the President signed the order in February of this year. Okay. Now, how does this impact cloud computing is something we as Indian corporations would need to look at very seriously. And I'm just not talking about prosecution, what happens and so on and so forth. Let's talk about the law itself at this point in time. Let's also not talk about cross-border situation, because if the hosted system is in the US or UK, what can we do is a very, very difficult question to answer. But what if the cloud is hosted in India? What are the rights, what are the regulations we have which we can use is something we need to understand. I'll just point out 2 examples to you. As per the IT Act, a cloud will be classified under something called an intermediary, which is a service provider, an ISP or a network guy and so on and so forth. They are responsible for 2 things. One is they are responsible for providing government in any information at any time as they are asked. And if they don't provide it, the CEO will be jailed and fined 7 lakh rupees, up to 7 lakh rupees. Second stipulation in the amendment right now is that they have the responsibility of securing our information. So if my information is there on a cloud, they have the responsibility of securing that information. And if I prove to them that it is not the case, they have given out my information, the CEO of that company can be jailed for 5 years or has to pay up to 2 lakh rupees. Is the stipulation in the law. Now, what are the escape routes they have here? So obviously there are exclusions to all this. Some of the exclusions I talk about is, first and foremost, is they have to prove that they are not the source where they started, this whole exposure started. They have to prove that they are not the destination of the exposure. And they have to prove that they have taken something called reasonable amount of care to protect their customer. Now you can imagine where this will lead to. Okay? So it is very critical for us to understand what the framework is when we make these choices. Unfortunately, a lot of times we don't make these choices. We don't know what we're doing. For example, blogging. In fact, blogging as a stipulation was there in 2000 itself in the IT Act. We stated that whoever blogs is responsible for the information you write there. So if I am blogging and putting up some information, I am responsible for the content I put up there. So if you are able to go and prove that you should not have said this, you can actually prosecute the person. Or if, for example, he or she has given out the company confidential information, we can possibly prosecute the person. So what happens can you jail the person, can you fine